today we're going to be checking out Disc 3, and we're going to get started straight away, I think, with A Bucket of Blood, which is a 1959 black and white American parody horror film directed by Roger Corman, whose name might sound familiar from the last episode, because he made the very first incarnation of Track of the Vampire, which, if you remember, went through about 5 iterations before ending up as this. Bucket of Blood also stars Dick Miller, who is a name and a face you'll probably recognise. He's been in a bunch of stuff, but I recognised him from being in Small Soldiers and the Gremlins franchise. So, pretty decent. Seems like there's some interesting people involved. Let's see if the film's any good.
Be your nose. Be your nose. Don't you like it?
The film follows a simpleton waiter called Walter, played by Dick Miller, who works at a beatnik bar and dreams of one day being an artist. After being ignored and picked on by the more popular crowd, and a mishap involving a cat, Walter creates a groundbreaking sculpture, but with a dark twist, and it eventually spirals out of control. The plot to this is fantastic and a hell of a lot of fun. It keeps up the pace, and it mixes comedy and horror really well. With only a 64-minute runtime, it doesn't even have a chance to overstay its welcome or get boring.
Did you see my cat? What's the matter? You losing? And if you're gonna be an artist, you've got to do nudes. Right. Ain't nobody an artist unless he does nudes.
The acting is fantastic here, especially Dick Miller, who's incredibly sympathetic and endearing, obviously to a point. The parody of the beatnik era with the elongated pontificating, pretentious poetry and specific dietary requirements is actually pretty funny, and it's a nice juxtaposition to the more overly romanticised view of the subculture that we get a lot nowadays. And it even sort of mirrors the modern hipster and how they're portrayed. It also touches upon the art world and the idea of keep on creating to stay relevant, which is a topic that I find quite fascinating. It's well made, well shot, and has got a great jazzy soundtrack. The kills can be a little tame, but they're still quite effective, and the designs for the sculptures are excellent. It also has a fantastic The End screen. Can't believe how much I enjoyed this one, you know. Like, might be the best one so far. I think, you know, it is generally quite well praised, this film. People say that it's one of Roger Corman's best, and it even had a TV remake and a musical. And that's all I've got to say on this one. Pretty damn good. Let's move on to the next.
You can make $25,000 on these pieces alone.
I thought you put money down.
I do, but $25,000?
Leave me alone.
Watch it, the plate pot.
Are these fertile eggs?
Are these eggs fertile? Naturally.
What you fried them in?
We ran out of the safflower seed oil, but I found a bottle of peanut oil on the shelf. Don't worry, it's not hydrogenated.
Is that the cold pressed stuff or the junk Hilda bought by mistake?
Okay, next up. The stupidest name out of the lot. We've got the giant Gilla monster. Or sorry, should I say the giant Gila monster, as it's actually pronounced, with one L. We'll talk more about that later. This one's also from 1959 and is a Texan monster movie directed by Ray Kellogg, who hasn't really done anything apart from a film called The Killer Shrews, so take of that what you will. This film was featured on Mystery Science Theater 3000, which is never a good sign. Let's take a look, shall we?
Buying a car, son, is just like getting married or going to New York City. Everybody ought to do it once, but nobody ought to do it twice.
The film's about a small Texan town where people are going missing, Turns out they're all being killed off by a giant lizard, and it's up to perfect boy car mechanic slash singer and a sheriff to save the day. As you could probably tell, this is awful. The plot is bare bones and loose. Every character's got like this little weird subplot for like one scene and then it's completely forgotten about. Honestly, I'd have rather watched a film about goody two-shoes car mechanic trying to make it as a rock and roll singer, which is a subplot in this. Forget all the giant lizard shit, it's pointless. This film is all talk and no action. Pure boredom.
Horace?
Morning, Sheriff.
Let me smell your breath.
Laughing's important, isn't it, Chase?
Oh, it sure is. And you know, I never felt any more like laughing than I do right now. I didn't think you'd be able to do that good in a week.
Didn't you, really?
Honest?
The acting's fine. It's not great, but it's fine, and the characters are somewhat likeable, if a little too flawless and neatly packaged. And there's some decent music here and there in this. I quite like some of the rock and roll music. And that is where my praises end. Let's talk about the lizard. So, it's not played by a Gila monster, which is an actual type of lizard. It's played by just a regular bearded dragon. Just a small, regular bearded dragon. So, they try and imply scale with little sets, but you only see 2 or 3 little sets. The rest of it is just shots of this lizard looking through bushes and stuff. You never see it interact with a character at all. So it's really hard to figure out how big this thing's supposed to be. One of the characters described its footprints as being as big as a double-decker bus or something like that, or maybe the monster itself is as big as a double-decker bus, but at no point does it feel that way. It doesn't have loud thumping footsteps or big roar or anything like that to imply its scale. It's just a cute little lizard that licks its tongue and patters around. It's laughable, but it's also massively disappointing with its lack of ambition. And you know what? A rubber suit would have been better in this instance. I think that's all I've got to say on this one. Okay, time to talk about the prints. So, Bucket of Blood is pretty terrible really. It's very low quality and highly compressed. Looks to me a bit like a VHS rip with the flickers, but it's also got really bad film grain issues, and the contrast is just way off. The darks are far too dark in this. Also, the sound is really muffled, and the music is way louder than the dialogue. It's hard to tell what people are saying sometimes. Just a massive shame because the film's so good. Giant Gilla monster looks about as shit as you'd imagine. It's like watching it with a concussion. It's very, very blurry. And anytime you get like a quick cut section, not that there are many in this film, but every time you do, you can't see what the hell is happening. Also, once again, sounds pretty shit, all muffled and hard to make out. Just 2 really bad prints this time.
But he's such an idiot.
How'd you ever get me in that bed, anyway? I carried you in there and I sat on you.
Now for the case, and like the prints, this is the worst one yet. For starters, they spelled Gila wrong in every place they possibly could, all over the case and menus. There is also a big spelling error here. Wax Uzium Gendres? Oh, I don't know. I think though, this might be the first spelling issue we've seen in this collection so far, at least one so blatant. Outside of that though, all the info's fine. It's worded a little weirdly, and the runtimes are fine too as well. Bucket of Blood's 2 minutes off, but nothing major. And on the disc, same old stuff again, just the films, but laid out quite nicely. And no anomalies this time, which is nice. No weird borders or anything like that. Overall then, one good and one bad. Bucket of Blood is a great little film with fantastic characters and a fun and funny story, whereas Giant Gila Monster is a boring and pathetic mess. I would definitely recommend checking out A Bucket of Blood if it looks interesting to you. I know I usually recommend something different, but in this case, this film's good enough to be recommended on its own. There are Blu-ray releases available. I'm not too sure on the release companies, but I had a look, but none of them really stood out to me as ones that I know. Maybe they're imports, I'm not sure. But it's also included for free on Amazon Prime streaming, and in colour, and with a decent print by the looks of it, so highly recommend checking that out if you've got Amazon Prime. Giant Gila Monster, I would not recommend, obviously. I'd recommend something else. Maybe like Godzilla or Them. You know, pretty obvious choices, but way better than this piece of shit. So, now it's time in the video where we try and figure out why these two films were put on the same disc together, what draws them together. Now there's an obvious answer and a not so obvious answer. The obvious answer is that they're both made in 1959, but that's boring. I prefer the not so obvious answer, which is that in both of these films there is in-film singing. So technically, they're both musicals. So, polar opposite films this time. And next episode, we're going to be checking out Blood Creature and Werewolf in a Girl's Dormitory. Sounds saucy.